Hello, everyone. Today I'm talking about writing for games. This is a presentation I gave to the romance chapter of the League of Utah Writers yesterday, but we had some problems with the recording equipment and things sometimes happen. So it didn't record. So I'm re-recording this so I can share it out to the people that were unable to attend there or want to refer back to it. And I know some other people that also asked me for some information about this. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here with some of the information, and we can get it going. There we go. So we should now be seeing the one screen that I have, writing for games. Now, there is more to play than you might think. This is kind of goes along with some information I've been doing over the years. So the first thing I always like to show is why me should I be talking about writing for games? So here are some of my writing credentials. Uh, I started out over a decade ago writing Guildmastergaming. And what Guildmastergaming is, it is writing reviews of tabletop games, books, and movies, and other articles supporting the gaming industry. And tabletop gaming industry. I want to make that clear. We'll get into more of that also. But that has led me to be doing all sorts of things. And this is just some of the places where I have had my work published at different levels, short stories, essays, game adventures, reviews, game support material, and also what started me out, which is now out of print and I'm working on it, is a book about cooking zucchini and everything. So you can see that's where it's at. And to kind of give you an idea, after the presentation, I went back and looked, and I have literally between all these different locations have written over probably about 1,500 articles that deal with gaming, game support and everything. But I've also worked directly with game people. So what are some of the differences and areas you can write for with a game? And we're going to talk a little bit about tabletop games, and that's my specialty. Tabletop games are games that are played on any flat surface of a table without the need of having to have a computer. Now, like I pointed out, sometimes now it's becoming more and more to have an app that goes for a game to help run the game smoother. And there are all sorts of videos out there. And that's another area I forgot to mention is doing videos that also support the gaming community. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But tabletop games are any board game, card game, dice game, tabletop role-playing game, anything that you can sit around with friends at a table and play. So, and that's like we're talking there, role-playing games. And then there's electronic games. And these are the ones that you want to play on a console or your computer. You can play across the internet with friends, all those sort of things. And those also require a lot of writing. And then there's side areas of gaming. This is where I got my start. And that is I wrote essays and reviews about games and what was happening in games, things that I felt were clarification. Now, to give you an idea, the first adventure I wrote that was published was back in the 1980s. So, and that was with first edition Dungeons and Dragons. And I've continued on since then. And I regularly publish now with Gallant Knight Games for Tiny D6 in their Tiny Zine magazine of adventures and support material. So, areas of writing for games. Now, these are more specific. You can write rules and instructions, examples, flavor text, game mechanics, tables, and you can see there's all sorts of different areas here. And this is direct writing for games. So, excuse me. So rules and instructions, that would be the literal rule books that are used in role-playing games. The instructions are for board games more. There is a difference between rules and instructions. I like to make sure people understand that because they have a difference in the level of technical writing that's involved and what they represent to do for games. Writing examples. These are different things like how does that rule work? How does that instruction work? How does that game play? I consider reviews as a little bit along those lines because I have to play them out right up at, here's the game mechanics in use. This is how it played through. This is how you do setup. You're going that way. Flavor text. These are usually in games where you see the rules, you see the instructions, and then you have an area that kind of gives a story that goes along with it. You know, here's this rule about how it works to invade this other country in this war game. Well, here's an example, and here's some flavor text of kind of diving deeper into the game of that occurring. So an example is on the board or in the game. The flavor text takes it one step further and starts creating a narrative for it. We have some people in the League of Utah writers that do quite a bit of this. Brian Young, that many of you might know, at least in the league, he writes BattleTech books. He writes flavor text for BattleTech within their upcoming book, source book. He has written the flavor text for Robotech for Catalyst Game Labs. So that kind of shows there's all sorts of these other areas of flavor text that goes into it. Now, game mechanics is a little bit different. This is the actual rules of how things work within the game. How, to make checks, how to conduct combat, how to conduct movement on the board. These are all the other things there. Tables can take all sorts of different things. These can be supportive. I've written an article that had a bunch of tables in it saying, oh, here are some things to add to the game. And so randomize some tables in there or quick reference tables. These usually tie into the game mechanics, but they can take a lot of different efforts, and it's a lot of different understanding to create a picture that will tell something within the text and bring it forward for easy reference. So what types of writing can you do for games? So you have all these different types: narrative, technical, copywriting, edit, layout, periphery. So we all, as a writers, most of us understand the difference, between narrative and technical. Narrative writing is you are telling the stories. That's kind of like what so many people are familiar with all the Star Trek, books out there in their Star Trek games, and they all tie together. Or the ones that tie to other games like I was just talking about, the BattleTech books, the Dungeon and Dragon books, the Dungeon and Dragon movie. All those are narrative storytelling that come out for game writing. Technical writing is usually more involved in those instructions and also in those rule sets, going through and making sure it's very clear how one thing leads to a next. And that is something, I think a lot of people that do technical writing forget about, that games are very technical in nature, and they need that type of writing in them. They need that type of support. And you'll find game developers are looking for it. Copywriting is more along the sales line. Now, a lot of times when I've worked with people that talk about copywriting, they talk about creating commercials. They talk about, some type of ad that's going out there to be placed someplace, be it a television ad, a radio ad, a billboard ad, flyers. But another level of copywriting is box cover. If you're looking at a game and you pick it up and you read the box, that's the copywriting work of trying to sell that game. For narrative writers, a lot of times it's very similar to the idea of what goes on the back cover of a book. And that's one of the things I point out through all this. So much of what writers do already is going to show up in all these different things. Now, when we move down to editing, this is the same sort of editing work that you're going to have in books that you're writing. You're going to have the narrative writing, the technical writing, the copywriting, but you've got someone that's going to be doing the different levels of editing. If you're doing narrative writing for a book, yeah, you might have a story editor, especially if you're dealing with a large intellectual property. Like I'm sure in BattleTech, I mean, they have very big restrictions about what can happen when and how it can happen. And there's going to be a story track, there's going to be like a showrunner almost that is controlling how all the different authors write those novels. The same thing if you're happening for a large property like, Dungeons and Dragons. They're going to have very strict rules and very much a layout of what they're looking for in terms of timelines in the story. So you have that. But then you get to the other levels of editing, editing the actual work of within the rule book, and then, making sure everything just flows through the normal editing. And then you get down to the copy editing and making sure that all the punctuation and grammar and all the small details are addressed. Everything that you can think of in other areas is going to play out here. Then you have layout. Just like when you do a layout of a book, you're going to have a layout in a game. It's going to be probably more towards the, the rule books or the source books of everything. But it's like, hey, how does this tie in with where the pictures lay out? Does the picture support what's being written? If you're doing a book, is it set up right so you're not losing stuff out in the margins, down in the crease where it's binding, everything like that. And periphery writing, we've kind of talked about some of it. It's the narrative that's outside of the game. But also, like what I do, reviews. That's periphery writing about the games. I can put out support articles, essays, reviews. That's all writing within the game community. And what's really fun about that is people are looking for that sort of stuff more than you might believe. That, I've not trying to brag, but I've literally had tens of thousands of page views on some of my articles that deal with the periphery aspects of different gaming. So there is a lot of different areas and types that you can be writing for games. So where to start? This was one of the things that came up as a question, and it was a great lead into this slide because we hadn't shown it yet. But it's like, where do you want to start if you're looking for writing for games? So the first and most important is, where are you interested? If you're interested in electronic games, like what's being shown on the slide here, those are some areas to look. If you want role-playing games, if you want board games, card games, that's one area. But also you can take a step further. Are you into the higher strategy games? Are you into historical strategy games? Are you into fantasy? Science fiction. We had a little discussion that there are romance style RPGs and anime RPGs. I will tell you that pretty much from my experience, if you're into role-playing games, any major property that you have seen in a movie or on television has a game that can go along with it. And there's people that are looking to play those games, and they're looking for material to help them play those games. So you have every area of interest you can think of, you can be there. Now, be professional. You are a writer. We are all writers, and we should be professional in all the writing we do. This is something I get along. I've actually had a discussion with a couple of people that thought that they were going to just go ahead and start doing some stuff on a blog. And they were like, yep, I'll just put it out there. I don't really care. I've also seen this with game writers where they've written a periphery item, like a story that was being published and they basically phoned it in, is the nice term to use, and it shows. So be professional. Make sure you're willing to do the work and put the effort into it to make it right, because every single one of these will actually reflect back on everything else you do. Now, to kind of support this further, something I didn't say is, I know that my professional writing in terms of my blog about reviews and everything has gotten me jobs writing larger things. I also know that I had a discussion recently with Brian Young at a convention. Same thing. It was because of his professional attitude that got him into bigger and bigger properties. Along those same lines, I have sold work of my books, the anthologies I'm in, because people have read the adventures I wrote. So it all carries back and forth. One is going to set to the other. Now, be willing to set limits. I've got that in there, but this goes both directions. Be willing to say yes to something if you think it will help you in promoting your career, the direction you want to go. I'm very clear. I want to be really clear about that. I shared an example of a story that I went through. Back in my earlier days, I was writing game reviews for Utah Geek Magazine, and I got a call from one of the gentlemen that was running it. Said, hey, we know you write game reviews, but we've got an opportunity to go to this new film festival. do you write movie reviews? And my response was, I do now. And at the time, I had no idea of what would go into a review for a movie. But I did the research. Did it and presented myself as a professional in terms of that writing. Now I am a regular invitee to that festival after 10 years or more that I go just so I can watch the movies and write up reviews. They enjoy having me there. And that has led to me having work from all over the world through those connections. Now, that is the willingness to say yes, but set the limits and know when to say no. I know what I've done with my writing and try to, develop a certain area that I work in, which is considered genre. That if I get something in heavy drama and they say, hey, we want you to review this, I've told them it's not my field, because that's actually going to hurt my brand to a certain way. And you got to know your brand, what it is you're willing to do. Now, if you do find that you've got conflicting areas, be willing to use a pen name. I know people that in writing, because I was talking with one author at one event one time, and she was talking about how the simple difference of adding a letter, her middle initial, was the way that she identified and let her audience identify the difference in her romance novels between young adult romance and adult romance. Something simple so that the people that were reading it could see that one change and go for it. I also know people that write erotica under pen names. All of that is totally acceptable. Yeah, I know people that they write horror, they write science fiction, they write fantasy, they write romance, all different areas, and they use different names for different areas. Even as simple as going from fantasy to science fiction. Dave Wolverton, Dave Farland, same person, different areas. So be willing to set the limits and know when to say no and when to make changes within yours so that you can maintain the work you want to do, maintain the branding that you want to put on yourself, and maintain the audience that you want to create for the style of writing you want to do. So, how to find work. Now, this is going a lot faster without all the questions and discussion we're having. So I apologize if it goes too quick. So I'll talk about a little bit that at the end. But how to find work. This is really kind of the same way as how do you find work as a writer? Same thing. Go to the websites, check magazines, check with developers, just step out there and try some different things. If you are looking to find work that's going to pay you to do it, and you want to work like in a particular property, go out, find their website, look up their requirements, how they take submissions. It's all there. Magazines are still there. There's still game magazines out. Some of them now go purely electronic, but they're the same thing. Go out there and find them. Now, if you're not sure where to find who these people are, if you check on the boxes, check on the books, they'll give you a lot of times list the websites. But I did talk about there's two sites that are, and they're sister sites to each other. So if you go to one, you'll find the other. And if you're looking for board games, tabletop games, go to Board Game Geek. It's commonly known to as BGG. But boardgamegeek.com, if you research those out, they list all the games, the board games that are coming out. Not that they actually go out and research and list them, but it's a resource site for developers and companies. So when they come out with a new game, or they got one that's getting ready to go on Kickstarter, or they're further along in development, and they know they're going to publish, they'll list it up on Board Game Geek. Now, what they do there is they will also list out their social media sites. They'll list out their home website pages, any place that you can kind of go and find them. And it is all there. You can read reviews on games. You can find out a lot of games on Board Game Geek. And if you're looking for RPGs, you'll see in the top corner of their site, the toggle switch where you can go to RPG, geek.com, roleplayinggamegeek.com. It's the same people, but that one is specialized all in the RPG field, tabletop RPGs. So you can do all of those areas too. You can find out who's the publisher, who's the developers, It gives you all the information that you can start reaching out and finding out what it is they're looking for. So that's where the websites, and like I said, the magazines are kind of the same way, and they're pretty much online now because that's where people go. Now, developers, this is kind of a fun thing that I like to do, and that is get to know the people around you. Get face to face with them, meet the developers, find places where you can go and talk to them and let them know, hey, I'm a writer. This is what I write. And you will find people looking for help, and they're willing to pay a lot of times, but that's part of the limits too. Make sure the pay is what you're willing to take. So developers, there are a few things. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of places around wherever you're at, but here in Utah is where I'm going to kind of focus because that's where this was intended for. So there is every January now, there's a group called the Board Game Designers Guild, and they hold an event called ProtoCon here in Salt Lake, and it is a place just to go and play the prototypes. Now, the Board Game Designer Guild, you can also just go and drop in and visit them because their main focus is they help do little workshops for the designers in the area, and then they have play testing where people bring in their prototypes and they play test them. It's a great place to kind of get to know what's coming up, where the industry is going on the local level. And this happens broader and broader as you get to larger conferences. And you can find out what they're looking for, what type of help they need. Is it an artist? Is it a writer? Is it an editor? And you can find out and talk with them and present your services to them. So that's, Protocon is kind of really right on that level. But you can also take it to the next level. I'm involved with a group called SaltCon. Now, SaltCon runs multiple events during the year up in the Davis County Convention Center. Their main event in spring, we just finished up, and it had over 2,500 attendees, fully sold out. Now, the main emphasis is to go and play games, but there's a vendor hall, and it's a great place where developers come and they present their games for play testing. Not only that, they have an annual competition for developers that they put in for to win a contract for publishing their game. It's kind of a lot of the same thing you see happening in the writing community happens in the gaming community. It's just the product instead of a book or a story is a game. So they do all that, and it's a great place to meet. Now, one of the things we started up at SaltCon, they asked me to start helping as the panel coordinator. And we did it this first time and had great response, and they asked me to expand it out. So we're going to be doing it. So, and you can see this at other events too. They're having a social event for game developers. At that event this year, the main thing the developers told me is they wanted to meet more writers and artists. Yeah, there was publishers there was developers there, but they're looking for the people to help them get their game to that point where it is ready to publish, ready to pitch to a publisher, to an acquiring editor. Just like we do in our books, they're looking for the same things. So, it's a great way to get out and meet people personally. Now, this is where I kind of had it, and then we opened up and we just did some general talking and discussion of everything. So with that, I'm going to kind of close out this screen and go back to myself here. And so we talked about some other areas that were brought up, like if you want to write games, where can you get your materials out? And it's, again, like I said, there's a lot of things that are very similar to what we have as writers in general, of our narratives, of our stories, anything that we're doing. You can create and publish stuff on Amazon. I won't go into the ins and outs of doing Amazon because it is its own little animal, and we all know that there's certain issues you have to make sure of about retaining publisher rights and doing all that. I know people that do, another great place for RPG materials is known as drive-through RPG, and that's drive-through is one word. It's all one word, drive-through RPG, but the through is spelled THRU. So drive-through RPG. That is a site dedicated to developing and for producing all these other side materials for games that are RPGs. I know people that write scenarios for different games, all sorts of different games, and they publish them through there. So a lot of times they do them as PDFs, so that way it keeps costs way down and keeps cost of purchasing way down. But I do know some that they actually self-publish and they use that as the outlet. So when the orders come in, they ship out hardcover books, or I should say, hard print books, not cover always. It's, we all know that. Slip of a tongue there. So that is one way. Another one I know that people do, and this one you have to kind of take more of an effort to keep on it, they do Patreons. And I forgot to mention that in the initial time I presented that. But Patreons, if you're not familiar with that, people pay a subscription price, but they expect something to be published and sent to them on a regular basis so that it's constantly got something either every month, every 2 weeks, whatever you set up and let them know. To give you an idea, I know one game developer, what they do is every month or every week, I don't remember, they put out a new map in support of their game. That's, what they do. I know people that put out character profiles on a regular basis. I know others that put out short stories on a regular basis. All of these things, and those can all be used. Just like if you put stuff up on DriveThru RPG, that's how you can also use Amazon. You can put it out there and just let people order, and then it comes through and it just, goes out there and working on its own. I also know people that take it and they have their own website and they list out the different materials they have. Now, some of them will actually use Amazon as the shipping mechanism to send out. Others have it all set up on their own so that they're taking care of all those issues, of making sure it's printed or published or electronics, sent out. They do that out through all their own. Just like, if you think about it, you can go traditional routes through the IPs, you can go self routes through all the same things that you're doing. It's just finding the ones that work best for whatever the material is you're writing. In this case, we're talking about games, but it's the same thing as if you're writing books. What are the best places to be looking for? Now, another way, kind of backing up as I think about things, another way that you can actually get a chance to meet people. I mentioned the Board Game Designers Guild. That's one area. If you're more into role-playing games, there's a Discord group just for developers. I know the one that I belong to just is along the Wasatch Front here in Utah, but I'm sure there's others. Or go out to your local game store and they'll probably know local developers that are looking for things, or you can let them know that, hey, I'm a writer and I want to be involved with gaming, but I need to get to know people and what they need from a writer. So since the time I first gave this, I had an interesting aspect to get approached to me. A local game designer I know is in the final stages of putting together a science fiction board game that has some real intricacies to it. And I won't go into the details of what the game's about, but it's got some real interesting things that to play off it. And he was approaching me about, he would like to get a group of authors together where we create a central backstory of what is in the game and then put together an anthology of short stories that support different aspects of the game. And that's for a board game. And this is not the first time I've seen it. There is a local developer, writer, musician here in Utah, Craig Nybo, who I remember at one point put out a game called Chops. And what it is you're building your musical band. Well, because of all his multi-talents, Craig Nybo not only put together the game, he had a book, which was a series of short stories that gave the backstories of each one of the main characters of his board game. And then he took with his band, they created music that supported and played through the different aspects of the game as they had developed it out to show what it was. So there's an example of where a game not only became written material and a game, but also music that could go along with it. And we're seeing more and more of that multimedia stuff taking place. Another local author has just, he was involved in writing Twisted Metal, and when the olden days was a heavy player of, Car Wars, which is an auto dueling game. Well, because of those aspects, he now has stories in that he's working on and publishing with Steve Jackson Gaming in an anthology for Car Wars. So more and more of these companies are seeing what's happened, like Catalyst Game Labs did with BattleTech and Shadowrun, what TSR has done with, you know, their gaming systems of D&D and some of the, Alternity and some of the others out there. They are moving out into more and more broader areas that writers can be involved in. So there's all sorts of fun things that you can be doing. You can write adventures for RPGs. You can write settings. You can write alternate rules. I've known someone that has taken a game that they didn't really like the way the rules were, and they created a brand new set of rules for the same game so it played more like the way they thought it should play. Actually, the alternate rules have been very popular. I've known people that actually have searched them out so they could share them with their group because they liked them better. Variations, the support material for all sorts of games, house rules about how games are played. You know, uh, I know people that have written up rule sets of how to turn a game into a tournament game so that you could actually play, 20, 30 people and find out who is the best of all of them as you kind of whittle down the numbers. There are very, very many areas. Anything that you could kind of think about that might tie into it, you could probably find a market for and find a source or a site to share that out. So that's what I'm going to leave you with, is that there is many, many areas of writing for games. Any tool that you are currently using to create your own writing can be applied to the game industry. It's just a matter of doing a little bit of research, finding where it fits in, maybe finding the right game or finding the right publisher or even publishing on your own. Probably sounds familiar if you've been into writing for any length of time. It's all available there. So if you do have any further questions, please reach out to me. In the notes on this video, I'll have my contact information, and you can ask me questions directly. I'll try to answer them best I can. And like I said, keep out there, look for the places where you can go, the ones that, if you don't have SaltCon. Some other ones I know here in Salt Lake, there's the Northern Utah Gaming Group, there's TimpCon, there's the Salt Lake Gaming Con. I know there's Genghis Con, Rage Con. The big one out there that a lot of people know in Indianapolis, Gen Con. All these are places where you can get out and mingle with developers. And why I'm thinking of that, I thought, don't just wait for the socials. If you see somebody selling games at a convention and you like the game and you want to write for it, talk to them at the booth and find out how. Don't push them too hard because they're working trying to make their money right then. But find out how you can contact and maybe reach out to them and provide services for what they're trying to accomplish. So thank you for joining me. Like I said, I know this was shorter than the other, but we didn't have all the questions and discussions. But I think you can kind of get an idea, and really feel free to reach out to me and ask questions. I'll do the best I can to answer them. Take care. And I'm going to throw this out at the end. This is off of my Guildmaster Gaming YouTube channel, my personal channel. If you like, and go back and check the other reviews, the interviews, the things I'm doing here. If you like it, please feel free to subscribe, and definitely share this with people that you know are interested in writing for games. Take care.